Hello everybody, I hope you're all doing great. Danny Dan here and welcome back to Danny's Recreational Space. Have you ever looked at power plugs as if they actually were action figure torsos? I'm not crazy, let me explain myself a little better. Have you ever thought about using plastic enclosures of some sort to replicate 5 points of articulation action figure torsos? I have done it once in the past with this build here, the Intergalactic Bounty Hunter C1s RGB, in the making of which I used a transparent toothpick plastic box as its torso. Lately, reorganizing my junk, I came across this power plug for the umpteenth time, but this time using my powerful trash vision, I was able to see a torso in it. Sincerely speaking, power plugs like these made me recall G.I. Joe action figures and the way they were made in the 80s. But also G.I. Joe action figures made me recall these power plugs. So I entered a creative loop where the bottom line was this: vintage European power plugs are held together with a screw. So were many action figures back in the days. I found this G.I. Joe from 1988 in a market. His name is Charbroil. Found himself loose, of course, but in such good conditions, it looks like it had never been played with. He was in a plastic bag together with this other one guy here, actually. He says I. And that was the catch of the day. This specific plug here has got a squared vintage look, which I find perfect to scratch build a vintage looking robot or droid. So let's begin from the arms. First thing first, we have to find a way to reproduce the pivot joint we saw as part of the G.I. Joe shoulder here. Now, if you are a compulsive junk hoarder like me, you probably have among your collection of scraps items like these that look great to make action figures pivot joints, rather than whatever they're used for. If not, it's also possible to make your own from scratch, using rods and tubes that fit well together, like these two here. Once glued together, these make a perfect T-shaped pivot joint for the arms of our little droid. Now we have to drill a hole onto the sides of the power plug to host the joints. In this operation, precision and patience are required, for the diameter of the hole cannot be bigger than that one of the pivot joint itself. Otherwise, the plastic case, when closed with the screw, won't be able to grant any friction. For this reason, I start very cautiously with a hand drill, and then, little by little, I proceed enlarging the two halves of the hole with drill bits of increasing diameter and a round file, constantly verifying what I'm doing. The arms are built using a sequence of plastic tubes having different width. The first one is the biggest one, and I'll use it to make the shoulder. And this first tube is then drilled in the middle to host the pivot joint. And the pivot joint is now secured into place, and so far so good. The body of a long mechanical pencil will make up the two sections of the arms, and yet another tube, the gray one, will make a fine elbow. After a few adjustments, the components are glued together. Ever since I had the idea of using these as hands for DIY action figures, I had been longing for this moment. These are clips that are used to secure electrical cables on the walls. And the way these cable clips work is much like Lego minifigures' hands, really. They provide a very nice grasp to anything that fits, whether it be sprues or kebab sticks, which can be used to make weapons and accessories for the action figure. Using a round file, the tube is shaped in order to make the hand fit properly. And as the French people say, et voila! Time for some upgrading. I would say these are some kind of hard plastic washers, and these are plastic bullets for air guns, and this is part of a zip tie that I use to fill this other hole on the wrist. Now these also are bits I have been longing to use. These are the back parts of some panning chambers, and I'm sure you have come across them at some point in your life. I think the arms are fine, at least until a second round of detailing. Let's now move to the wheels. I don't know where these hard plastic wheels come from, but I know they will rotate around this bamboo stick, which will function as a rod. I wanted to try something different for the bottom part of the droid, so instead of providing it with legs, I thought I'd go for some wheels. I start drilling a hole which will eventually have the same diameter of the rod, first with a hand drill, then with a small drill bit. Afterwards I do the remaining part of the job using a round file and much patience. I've got to do some cleaning in the inside part of the power plug to make room for the rod. There are quite a lot of little plastic bits that are getting in the way. And this turned to be quite a time-consuming process. At some point I ended up using no less than a chisel. Okay, now that we're done with the rod, let's carve some room for the wheels. This operation also required some calculation. Here I have to be precise, or it will look very bad. I want the end of the grooves to be nice and round, following the shape of the wheels. And after some upgrading, I found myself quite satisfied with the result. To make the back wheel, I found this bit, which I think is simply fantastic. With all probabilities, it is the part of an old toy. I found a way to stick it right on the back of the droid, and it'll serve as a rod to connect the body of the droid and the swivel wheel. Then I'm gonna use this, which is the section of a lighter, and this tiny wheel that, sure enough, comes from a part of a Kinder Egg surprise. I thought of this back wheel being just like one of those vintage swivel wheels, and I want to give it an aerodynamic look, shaping it into a drop. I'll make the sides cutting pieces from the plastic cover of an old notebook. I now proceed making the first of the two holes for the wheel, and I do it with a hand drill, while the carter is still opened. And this allows me to have a guide to easily drill the second hole on the other side. To secure the little wheel in place, I use the brittle plastic of a Christmas ornament hook, which I slip right into the holes, and with a lighter I slightly burn the edges of it to make realistic rivet-looking bumps. I thought the body of the droid to be slightly slanted. For this reason, before gluing the rod to the wheel, I want first to connect it to the droid's back, to get the inclination right. At this point, I only had to connect the rod to the top of the wheel at the right inclination. Since the rod is placed right on the way to get to the screw, I actually didn't feel like gluing it onto the body of the droid, because I wanted to be able to remove it at will, in case it was necessary to open up the case or do some modification. Let's now move to the head. As you can see, I've already started making it. The shape is like that one of my first action figure C1R0, made from a section of a toothpick transparent plastic case. As connector with the droid's body, I used one of those bits I showed you just before, since it fit perfectly in the upper hole of the power plug. And now I just have to find something to enlarge the end part of this connector peg in order to prevent it from coming out from the head once put into place.
Found one, you have?
Right at the second shot. Not bad at all, I think. This happened to work just fine. With such a tight fit, I could even avoid using super glue. Well, as you can imagine, with the top of the head already glued into place, drilling the hole onto the base and securing the connector inside was a pain. It is much better to take care of the connector peg before building the head. I also want to put a plastic ring to function as a spacer in between the head and the body of the droid. We can say it'll become the neck of the droid. The green ring will secure the peg inside the head. Too bad I glued it on the peg. Now it won't move. I shouldn't have to put super glue on the connector, but I did. I simply should have pushed the green ring all the way down to the bottom part of the head. All this with the head already mounted onto the main body. But luckily I solved the problem with a couple of rounds of super glue and baking soda, and the connector became as solid as a rock. And here it is, into place, able to rotate without any problem. Let's come up with some details for the head now. A bell-shaped bead is placed on top, and that will hold a little antenna. The ending part of medium-sized zip ties are stuck onto the sides of the head. Now with a small portion of a tiny zip tie, I'm making the mouth. By the way, these are slices cut from a bamboo stick. Their function here is to make the eyes stand out a bit more. And for the eyes, something special. Something coming from the inside of these small buttons I found welded onto a circuit board of an old TV set I tore apart. These bits are kind of cool, you gotta admit that, and I will leave them uncolored. This lever certainly is the response of some brick toy line to this. I think it'll make a fine antenna on top of the droid's head. I wanted so badly to provide the droid with prehensile hands, so why don't make him a ray gun with a vintage flavor, says I. This first bit here, you tell me what it is and where it comes from. I really don't have a clue. Somehow I've got the feeling I might be way too old to recognize this. This awesome bit I do remember. It's part of a printer I tore apart some time ago. I slightly modified the back of it to make a better connection with the gray bit, at the center of which I drill a small hole. Then I use this white bit to make the back part of the ray gun. I'm sure you guys all know what this bit is and where it comes from, so I guess there's no need to mention it. We already saw how I plan to use this sprue to make some sort of accessories for the droid, since it fits perfectly the grasp of its hands. So now it's only a matter to connect it with the ray gun to come up with some sort of handle for it. I drill my way into the hinge of the gray bit using a new, very sharp drill bit at a very low RPM, paying much attention in maintaining the inclination I want. Then I use the remaining part of the Christmas ornament hook to fill up the holes of the hinge. And then again with a lighter I take care of the ending parts of it. And a small ring cut from a plastic tube to make some decoration on the bottom part of the handle. First bit coming from my collection of micro scraps is this Lego brick clone, to be stuck right in the back of the droid's head. I think it'll make a fine detail paired with the antenna. And then I would like to apply these tiny bits, parts of little sprues. Enough for the head, I think. I don't want to overdo it. I then made a series of rings, slicing the barrel of a pen, and clipped them onto selected spots on the arms to achieve some visual interest. And here again with some of those little sprues to break the monotony of the shoulder. Time to provide the chest with some detailing. To cover these holes in the front, I made a plate with part of the notebook plastic cover I used just a few minutes ago. Going through the micro bits of my collection of scraps, I also ran into this bit, and it was love at first sight. After a more detailed inspection, the bit in question appears to be a portion of a very small back-engine racing car with a spoiler and even a couple of racing drivers, one next to another. How cute. I don't know where it comes from, but sure enough though, this interesting bit will help to break the dullness of the droid's chest. No doubts about that. I first go ahead and level out the inferior part of the body with the rest, on both sides, using flat plastic bits and portions of zip ties. Now I can finally put the bit in place and glue a couple of panels on the sides of the droid to prevent the bamboo rod from coming out. These small bits, that are the actual buttons inside these trash treasures, along with small rings, are glued onto the panels to suggest the idea of a wheel axle coming out from the sides. I only can think of a word to describe this build. Funky! Thank you, James. Yes, it does look a bit funky. Kind of a droid mashup. But that's just what it is, really. It's a torso belonging to a fierce combat robot, which, after missing both legs fighting against the evil ones, had been converted by its master to a sentinel droid for his headquarters. And I can actually totally see it, shuttling back and forth, monitoring every nook and cranny of its master's mansion, providing him with peace and tranquility. Danny Dan, in your video you used a vintage power plug, but power plugs have screws, while we have plenty of plastic cases here, but none of them has screws. Will it be possible for us to make action figures out of these as well? This is material for the next video, in which we will examine different solutions to make no less than 5 points of articulation action figures from plastic enclosures of all sorts. As always, thank you so much to all the new subscribers to the channel, all the people that watch, like, share, comment on my work. I'm very thankful for your support, and it's an honor for me to be part of this community. Hope you liked the video, and until next time, you have a good one. Bye!